If you wanted to browse for music in a physical store today, you'd have to search for one. The chain record stores that once lined shopping malls and downtown streets, Tower Records, Sam Goody, Virgin Megastores, Awachut, are gone. By the early 1990s, approximately 9,500 chain music stores operated across America. Within 15 years, nearly 7,500 had closed. The bins are gone. The listening booths vanished decades earlier. The clerks who could steer you towards something you'd never heard of, but would love for the rest of your life, they've scattered to other work. What remains are perhaps 2,000 independent stores, most of them open within the last decade, serving a market that has fundamentally transformed. This is the story of what those stores were, how the system that sustained them actually worked, and why it all came apart so quickly. You walked in, and everything hit you at once. The smell came first. Part cardboard, part dust, part something harder to name. The particular chemical scent of vinyl compound mixed with old paper and incense, if the store burned incense. Some did. Then the sound. Music playing from overhead speakers, chosen by whoever was working that day. Not background music. Music with intention. Miles Davis one minute, the Ramones the next, then maybe Coltrane. The clerk controlled the stereo, and the stereo was a statement. The visual landscape was dense. Wooden bins stretched in rows, each one packed tight with record spines organized alphabetically within genre sections. Rock over here, jazz in the corner, R&B along the back wall, classical in a separate room if the store was big enough. New releases faced outward on the walls, their 12 by 12-inch covers functioning as gallery art. Posters for upcoming concerts layered every available surface. Cardboard tabs separated the alphabet. And somewhere near the back or the side, the bargain bin sat low to the floor, territory for the patient hunter. The physical act of browsing was a workout. Your fingers walked across record spines, flipping through dozens, sometimes hundreds. You'd pull out anything with striking cover art, study the front and back, read the liner notes, check the personnel and producers. Then you'd either slide it back into the bin or tuck it under your arm while you kept looking. Writer Curtis White once described the moment perfectly. Walking into a record store, seeing the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and thinking, life can be other than it has been. That was the power of the place. It wasn't just retail, it was discovery. If you're enjoying this dive into the past, consider subscribing. We release new documentaries about vanished corners of American life every week. The ritual didn't end at the register. You took the record home, carefully removed the shrink wrap, slid the inner sleeve out. You placed the disc on the turntable. You lowered the needle, and then you sat with the gatefold sleeve open, reading lyrics and credits while the music filled the room. This wasn't consumption. It was communion. Before streaming services let you sample any song on demand, before listening stations with headphones, there was a more intimate solution. The listening booth. Picture a small enclosed cubicle, about the size of a phone booth, sometimes with glass panels, sometimes with wooden walls. Inside, a bench or a standing space, a speaker or a set of headphones, and the opportunity to hear a record before you bought it. These booths were common in American record stores by the early 1950s, particularly for sampling the new 45 RPM single format. The setup varied from store to store. In some, the booth had its own turntable. You'd take the record in, put it on, and listen. In others, the clerk placed the record on a turntable behind the counter and piped the sound into the booth through speakers. Either way, you could preview before you paid. The ancestry goes back further than you might expect. In the 1890s, phonograph parlors let customers insert a coin and listen through ear tubes, a pay-per-listen model that predated the jukebox. By the 1950s, the listening booth had evolved into something essential to the teenage record-buying experience. Groups of friends would crowd into a single booth, sampling 45s that cost less than $1, sharing the experience of hearing something new. One commentator called these booths analog Napster, Håndskilsti, and there's truth in that. The problem was exactly the one Napster would later face. Too many people sampling, not enough people buying. Vinyl records scratched easily from repeated plays. Every time a customer previewed a record and didn't buy it, the store was left with damaged merchandise. And the rise of chain record stores in the 1960s prioritized floor space and profit margins over the service-oriented booth model. When you're trying to maximize square footage, a listening booth represents dead inventory space. By the mid-1960s, the booths were mostly gone. What replaced them wasn't nothing. Eventually, stores would install listening stations, rows of CD players with headphones where you could sample select albums. But the enclosed intimacy of the booth, the sense of privacy and discovery, didn't survive the transition. That particular magic required a format that hadn't yet arrived, and an architecture that economics wouldn't support. The modern record store was born from a format war. On June 21, 1948, Columbia Records introduced the 33 1/3 revolutions per minute long playing record, the LP, a 12-inch disc made of vinyl instead of the older shellac, with micro grooves that could hold approximately 25 minutes of music per side. It was a revolution in storage density. What previously required multiple discs could now fit on one. RCA Victor wasn't about to let Columbia own the future. In 1949, they countered with their own format, the 7-inch 45 revolutions per minute single, smaller, lighter, cheaper to produce, and designed for a different market. The single hit, not the extended work. For 2 years, the war of the speeds raged. Consumers had to choose between incompatible formats, incompatible players, and incompatible visions of what recorded music was supposed to be. It wasn't until the industry settled on a truce that the modern record store could take shape. The LP for albums, the 45 for singles. Both formats, both speeds, both markets served. The 45 RPM single dominated the 1950s pop market. At less than $1 each, the manufacturer's suggested list price was 89 cents in 1955, about $10.24 in today's money. Singles were affordable for teenagers. They fueled jukeboxes in every diner and dance hall. Portable battery-operated phonographs let kids take them anywhere. Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock sold 3 million copies in 1955 alone. But the cultural center of gravity shifted in the 1960s. Artists like Bob Dylan, the Beatles, and the Beach Boys began treating the album as a complete artistic statement, not just a collection of singles and filler. The LP became the primary format for serious music buyers. Albums replaced singles as the lead product. Here's something remarkable about LP pricing. It stayed almost flat for over 2 decades. A standard 12-inch mono LP listed at $3.98 from 1948 through 1971. That's more than 20 years without a price increase. Stereo editions were $4.98. Prices escalated through the 1970s, $5.98 in 1972, $6.98 in 1973, $7.98 in 1976, $8.98 in 1978, but many stores sold well below list price. One collector recalled buying LPs at Record City in Skokie, Illinois for $3.39 each, or 3 for $10 in the early 1970s. Adjusted for inflation, a vinyl LP in 1978 cost about $30 in today's money. That's less than many new vinyl releases sell for now. The formats created the architecture. Singles went in one section, albums in another. Genre divisions made sense because labels marketed that way. The physical dimensions of the LP, that 12 by 12-inch canvas, gave album cover art space to become an art form of its own. The listening booth worked because records were fragile and expensive enough to justify preview access. Every element of the record store experience flowed from the physical reality of what was being sold. Records didn't materialize in stores by magic. Behind every bin of LPs was an elaborate distribution system that shaped the entire industry. The major labels, RCA, CBS/Columbia, Warner, Polygram, Ajay and Mal, were vertically integrated. They recorded the music, pressed the records, and ran distribution networks that delivered product from pressing plants to stores. Each maintained regional warehouses across the country. The infrastructure was enormous. Between the labels and the retail stores sat two critical intermediaries. First, the One Stop. A One Stop was a regional distributor that stocked products from all labels. Independent store owners couldn't maintain direct accounts with every record company, so they'd make regular runs to the One Stop to pick up inventory. You needed the new Atlantic release, the new Capitol release, and the new Motown release? The One Stop had all of them. One location, one invoice, one trip. Second, the rack jobber. This was a stranger arrangement. Rack jobbers managed record departments inside stores that weren't record stores. Department stores like Sears and May Company, drugstores, even grocery stores. The rack jobber owned the inventory, decided what to stock, maintained the displays, and split the proceeds with the host retailer. The department store didn't have to know anything about music. The rack jobber handled everything. By the 1960s, major department stores across America had record sections, managed entirely by rack jobbers. It was an invisible empire, hundreds of record stores that weren't really stores at all, just subsections of larger retail operations run by specialists who understood what sold. Record company representatives visited actual record stores regularly. They'd bring promotional materials, posters, cardboard standees, advance copies for the staff to preview, but they were also gathering intelligence. What's selling? What's getting requests? What's the staff excited about? This was the crucial link. A store clerk's enthusiasm for an unknown artist could ripple upward to a label's marketing department. If enough stores reported interest, the label might increase production, expand distribution, invest in promotion. The system was inefficient by modern standards, but it gave record stores genuine power as tastemakers. That power would eventually make them enemies of the people who needed them most. No element of record store culture was more celebrated or more mocked than the staff. Record store clerks were legendary for three things: their knowledge, their opinions, and their willingness to judge your purchases. As one customer put it, bookstore owners and record store owners used to be oracles. You'd go in this dusty old place, and they might point you towards something that would change your life. The method was informal but effective. 21 Pilots drummer Josh Dunn described his approach. I'd find the most tattooed guy there and have him recommend me a new album once a week. You trusted the person behind the counter because they clearly cared about music more than seemed reasonable. Their passion was a credential. The career paths were chaotic. Lenny Kaye, who became Patti Smith's guitarist, worked at Village Oldies on Bleecker Street in the 1960s. Iggy Pop credited a record store with his identity. I became Iggy because I had a sadistic boss at a record store. Dave Grohl got hired at Tower Records, as he later explained, because it was the only place that would hire him with his long hair. The clerks functioned as human recommendation algorithms decades before Spotify existed. They could assess your taste from a few purchases, then steer you toward artists you'd never heard of. They remembered what you bought last month. They knew what was coming out next week. They understood connections between genres that no computer could map, because those connections lived in their heads, built from years of listening. This power came with a dark side. The smug, judging clerk who sneered at mainstream tastes became a cultural archetype. Nick Hornby captured it perfectly in his 1995 novel High Fidelity, the story of a record store owner who organizes his collection autobiographically and compiles endless top 5 lists while judging everyone around him. The 2000 film adaptation, with John Cusack and a breakout Jack Black as the obnoxious clerk Barry, grossed $47 million worldwide. Audiences recognize the type immediately. The character archetype feels familiar even now, decades later. Most serious music fans can pinpoint a Rob in their own lives, someone who made you feel small for not knowing the B-side of a record they considered essential. But the judgment was part of the deal. You accepted the risk of being condescended to because the upside was genuine, someone who might introduce you to music you'd love for the rest of your life. Record stores served functions far beyond retail. They sold concert tickets. They displayed posters for upcoming shows, functioning as pre-internet event calendars. They hosted artist signings and in-store performances. They were gathering places where teenagers could spend hours without buying anything at all. Tower Records founder Russ Solomon understood this instinctively. It's a place, for young people especially, to hang out, he said. They didn't have to buy anything, but they get experience just looking at what's there. Tower's San Francisco store, which opened in 1967, became ground zero for the counterculture. Solomon recalled the context. The Fillmore was cooking, the Avalon was cooking, the whole Haight-Ashbury thing was happening. All those bands were there, and Rolling Stone magazine was just starting. The record store was part of the ecosystem. It wasn't separate from the music, it was where the music lived between performances. In African American communities, record stores played an even more vital role. Between 500 and 1,000 black-owned record stores operated in the American South alone during the 1960s and 1970s, with probably twice that number nationwide. These were commercial public spaces where black consumers could shop and discuss music without fear or discomfort. Bill Hawkins' record shop in Cleveland went further. It hosted radio broadcasts, artist meet and greets, and even had a recording studio attached where he recorded up-and-coming musicians. The record store was community infrastructure. It was where you heard about the show happening this weekend, where you ran into friends who shared your taste, where you spent Saturday afternoon when you had nowhere else to be. The purchase was almost secondary. The experience was primary. This would matter later when the business model started failing. What exactly was being lost? Not just a retail operation, a gathering place, a cultural node, a space where teenagers learned what they liked and who they wanted to be. The story of Tower Records is the story of American music retail in miniature. Ambition, expansion, hubris, and collapse, all of it mapped onto one family, one company, one brand. Russell Solomon was born on September 22, 1925. His father owned the Tower Cut Rate Drugstore in Sacramento, California, located in the Tower Theater building. In 1941, the elder Solomon started selling used jukebox records in a room adjacent to the drugstore, calling it Tower Record Mart. Solomon bought the record operation from his father in 1952. It didn't work. He went under from lack of capital. Then he borrowed $5,000 from his father and reopened on December 15, 1960 at 2514 Watt Avenue in Sacramento. The store's logo, a red and yellow color scheme inspired by Shell Oil, was designed by Mick Michelson. The corporate parent was called MTS Inc., named after Solomon's son Michael. Expansion followed a calculated westward arc. San Francisco came in 1967, a converted Chinese grocery store on Bay and Columbus Streets. The first Los Angeles store opened in 1970 on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood. It quickly became the most famous record store in the world. Elton John visited every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Bruce Springsteen, Mick Jagger, and Jack Nicholson were regulars. The Sunset Strip location wasn't just a store, it was a landmark. The New York City operation sprawled across multiple levels at Broadway and East 4th Street in Greenwich Village, advertising itself as the largest record tape store in the known world. Additional flagships opened in Boston in a building renovated by Frank Gehry. Nashville got a store in a former Packard dealership. There was even a tower inside Trump Tower. By 1990, Solomon made the Forbes 400 list at number 335, with a net worth pegged at $310 million. International expansion had begun in 1979, with a store in Sapporo, Japan. By the late 1990s, Tower operated approximately 200 stores in 30 countries across 5 continents. Revenue peaked at around $1.1 billion in 1999. Solomon's management philosophy was radical for retail. He let individual stores stock what their neighborhood wanted. New Orleans had a massive heritage music section. Nashville's country selection was enormous. San Francisco's classical annex was renowned. Clerks who showed initiative were promoted to executive positions. The culture was freewheeling, personal, and resistant to corporate standardization. That approach built the empire. It would also make the empire difficult to save when the ground shifted. While Tower Records built cathedral-sized stores on urban boulevards, another empire conquered a different territory, the American shopping mall. Sam Goody started the way many music retailers did, selling rare records out of a different kind of store. Sam Goody Goodowitz began with 78 RPM discs from his toy and novelty store in New York City in the late 1930s. By 1951, he'd opened a flagship store on 49th Street that welcomed 4,000 customers daily. By 1955, Sam Goody was selling an astonishing 7% of all 33 and one-third RPM discs in the entire nation, grossing approximately $4 million. Gudowitz was a pioneer of discount pricing and mail-order sales. One writer called him a hero among penniless college students. In 1978, he sold his 26-store chain to the American Can Company for $5.5 million. American Can merged Sam Goody with a different chain it already owned, Musicland, founded in 1955 in Minneapolis. Through the 1980s and 1990s, the combined entity grew into the largest music retailer in America. The Musicland Group operated over 1,000 stores at its peak and employed approximately 10,000 people. Sam Goody alone had roughly 800 locations, most of them in shopping malls. The umbrella also sheltered Suncoast Motion Picture Company for video, media play, a big box concept launched in 1992, with stores averaging 45,000 square feet, and On Cue, a small town format. The mall strategy made sense. You captured foot traffic from people who were already there to buy something else. Teenagers wandered the mall, eventually wandered into Sam Goody, and emerged with a cassette tape or CD. The stores were smaller than Tower, more standardized, less eccentric. What they lacked in character, they made up for in ubiquity. Other chains followed similar paths. Virgin Megastores arrived in America in December 1992, when Richard Branson opened the first U.S. location on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles. At their peak, 23 U.S. megastores generated approximately $310 million annually. Camelot Music, founded in 1956 in Ohio, grew to nearly 300 stores by the late 1980s, and peaked at 455 locations after acquiring the Wall chain in 1998. Warehouse Music, founded in 1970 in California, expanded to roughly 600 stores after acquiring Blockbuster Music in 1998, and there was National Record Mart, founded in Pittsburgh in 1937, originally as Jitterbug Records, selling used jukebox 78s. It holds the distinction of being the first music store chain in the United States. It peaked at 175 stores and operated for 65 years. By the early 1990s, approximately 9,500 chain music stores operated in the United States. Add the independents, the department store record sections, and the small regional chains, and the total was certainly much higher. Employment across the major chains alone numbered in the tens of thousands. Musicland Group had approximately 10,000 employees at peak. Tower Records had roughly 4,500 across North America. Warehouse employed about 7,000. This was the landscape at its maximum extent. Record stores had never been more numerous, more accessible, or more deeply embedded in American life. The compact disc changed everything. It arrived in the American market in 1983 with only about 20 titles available. The first CD players, like the Sony CDP-101, retailed for approximately $900. CDs accounted for just half of 1% of recorded music sales that first year, but adoption accelerated faster than anyone predicted. 5.8 million CDs shipped in 1984, 22.6 million in 1985, 53 million in 1986. By 1987, CD revenue had overtaken vinyl LP revenue. By 1991, CDs overtook cassette tapes, the last format standing between them and total dominance. The vinyl market collapsed with startling speed. 295.2 million LPs shipped in 1981. By 1991, that number had fallen to 4.8 million. Most major labels stopped pressing vinyl for new releases by the late 1980s. By 2002, CDs held 95.7% of all recorded music sales, a market monopoly no physical format had ever achieved. What made CDs so profitable was the gap between what they cost to make and what stores charged for them. The raw materials for a single CDE, polycarbonate disc, jewel case, printed booklet, cost roughly 40 to 45 cents. Total manufacturing ran to perhaps $3 to $4.50 per unit, yet the standard retail price was $15.99, and it stayed there for nearly 2 decades. LPs and cassettes had listed at $8.99 to $9.99. CDs were priced 50 to 70% higher for a product that cost less to manufacture. As the Orlando Sentinel noted in 1992, the industry grew 3.9% in dollars while shipping 7.5% fewer units. The math was beautiful, keen for the record companies. They were selling less product and making more money. The CD boom had a secret engine, the replacement cycle. Throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, consumers repurchased their entire vinyl and cassette collections on CD. Every copy of Dark Side of the Moon, Rumors, Thriller, and Born to Run was bought again at a higher price. The industry was essentially reselling its own back catalog, a one-time windfall that executives mistook for permanent growth. The peak year for recorded music revenue was 1999. U.S. sales reached approximately $14.6 billion, roughly $21 to $26 billion in inflation-adjusted terms. CD unit shipments peaked at approximately 942.5 million copies in 2000. Per capita music spending in 1999 was about $75 per person in today's money. By 2016, it would be just $23. But in 1999, nobody knew that. The boom fueled massive expansion. Tower Records went global. Musicland opened cavernous media play big box stores. Virgin Megastores arrived on American shores. New chains sprouted and existing ones expanded aggressively. Everyone was hiring. Everyone was building. The assumption was that the trajectory would continue indefinitely. The economics of running a record store were more complicated than they appeared. Behind the retail price of $15.99 was a distribution system controlled by the major labels. Large chains ordered directly from distributors at wholesale prices of roughly $10.72 to $11.20 per CD. Smaller stores bought through independent distributors at a 5 to 10% markup above that. The math gave retailers a gross margin of about 30 to 35%. That sounds adequate, but rent had to come out of that margin. Payroll, inventory costs, shrinkage. The margin was thin enough that any significant disruption could make the business unviable. One important feature of the system was the return policy. Stores could return unsold CDs to distributors for credit. This reduced the risk of stocking unfamiliar artists. You could take a chance on something and send it back if it didn't sell. But it also encouraged over-ordering, and it created a constant flow of product moving both directions through the supply chain. Another critical piece: co-op advertising money. Labels paid retailers to feature their releases in newspaper circulars and store displays. This subsidy kept the Sunday newspaper ads affordable and gave stores marketing support they couldn't have afforded on their own. Then there was the Tuesday release day. New albums came out every Tuesday, creating weekly cycles of anticipation and traffic. Midnight release events became cultural phenomena in the late 1990s and 2000s. Fans would line up for major albums. The September 17, 1991 release of Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 prompted famous celebrations at record stores nationwide. The system had momentum, it had infrastructure, it had habits embedded in millions of consumers who knew that Tuesday meant new music. But the economics were more fragile than they looked. The 35% margin depended on the $15.99 price holding. The returns policy depended on stable demand. The co-op money depended on labels wanting to support traditional retail. The Tuesday ritual depended on people being willing to leave their houses and drive to a store. Every one of those dependencies would break, some gradually, some all at once. In 1999, recorded music revenue hit $14.6 billion. Tower Records operated in 30 countries. Sam Goody had 800 locations. Virgin Megastores were expanding across America. The industry had never been larger or more confident. Then three things happened in rapid succession, and the world these stores had built began to collapse. On June 1st, 1999, an 18-year-old Northeastern University student named Sean Fanning launched a piece of software that would terrorize an industry. He called it Napster, his online basketball nickname, a taunt about his hair. The idea was simple. Users could search for songs on other users' computers and download them directly. No store, no payment, no physical object. Just the music, traveling through phone lines as a digital file. Fanning's roommate had complained about how hard it was to find music online. That complaint became the seed of a revolution. Growth was explosive. By summer 2000, Napster had 20 million users downloading approximately 14,000 songs per minute. On some college campuses, over 61% of network bandwidth was consumed by MP3 file transfers. Schools started banning the service just to keep their networks functional. The commonly cited figure of 80 million registered users represents the total before shutdown. The verified peak, ausstieg, 26 million simultaneous users worldwide, came in February 2001. The record industry's response was furious. The RIAA filed suit on December 6, 1999. Metallica sued on April 13, 2000, after discovering their unreleased song, I Disappear, circulating freely. Dr. Dre followed shortly after. Napster offered a $1 billion settlement to the record companies in February 2001. It was rejected 2 days later. The service shut down its network on July 11, 2001, and filed for bankruptcy in June 2002. But killing Napster was like cutting one head off a hydra. Kazaa, LimeWire, BitTorrent, Grokster, Morpheus, dozens of services proliferated, many using decentralized architectures that were far harder to shut down. By the mid-2000s, an estimated 1 billion songs per month were being shared through peer-to-peer networks. The impact on sales was debated by academics, but obvious to anyone working in a record store. Global music sales dropped from approximately $38 billion in 1999 to $32 billion in 2003. Research estimates varied widely on how much of the decline was caused by file sharing versus other factors. The end of the replacement cycle, competition from video games and DVDs, the 2001 recession, but the direction was unmistakable. The RIAA eventually sued approximately 35,000 individual file sharers before abandoning the strategy in December 2008. It generated more public resentment than revenue recovery. The deeper damage wasn't just the piracy itself, it was the change in perception. A generation of consumers learned to think of music as something that could be free. The file separated the music from the object, and once the object was gone, so was the reason to visit a store. On October 23, 2001, Steve Jobs announced a device that would reshape how people related to music. The iPod, a 5 GB hard drive weighing 6.5 ounces, priced at $399, with a tagline that captured its promise: 1,000 songs in your pocket. The name came from a freelance copywriter named Vinny Chieco, inspired by the film 2001, A Space Odyssey. Open the pod bay doors, Hal. Apple would go on to sell an estimated 450 million iPods before discontinuing the product line in May 2022. But the iPod was only the hardware. The weapon was the iTunes Store. It launched on April 28, 2003, with over 200,000 songs from all 5 major labels. Jobs had personally negotiated the deal, pushing for a simple legal alternative to piracy. The price point was deliberately chosen: 99 cents per song, $9.99 per album. Jobs understood something the labels had missed. The album was no longer a viable unit of commerce. For decades, the music industry's business model had depended on bundling. You wanted 2 hit singles, but to get them you had to buy the entire album, 10 or 12 tracks, only a few of which you actually wanted. The $15.99 price point assumed you were buying the bundle. The iTunes Store unbundled the album. Now you could buy just the 2 songs you liked for $1.98 instead of paying $16 for 10 songs you didn't want. It was a better deal for consumers. It was a catastrophe for the economic model that sustained record stores. Why drive to a store and pay $15.99 for a CD when you could click a button and pay $2.97 for the 3 tracks you actually wanted? The milestones came rapidly. iTunes sold 1 million songs in its first week. It hit 100 million songs by July 2004. The billionth song, Speed of Sound by Coldplay, was purchased on February 23, 2006, by a 16-year-old in Michigan. By April 2008, iTunes surpassed Walmart as the #1 music retailer in America. The 10 billionth song, Guess Things Happen That Way, by Johnny Cash, was purchased on February 24, 2010, by a 71-year-old in Woodstock, Georgia. In less than 7 years, a digital store with no physical presence had sold 10 billion tracks. The math that had sustained record stores for half a century, high-margin albums sold in specialized retail environments, no longer computed. The new math was 99 cents, downloaded from anywhere, requiring no trip, no clerk, no browsing, no discovery. Just the song you already knew you wanted. The closures came in waves. Tower Records filed its first Chapter 11 bankruptcy in February 2004, carrying $80 to $100 million in debt. Bondholders forgave millions in exchange for an 85% ownership stake. It wasn't enough. Revenue had plunged from $1.1 billion in 1999 to $430 million by 2005, the NOS, a 57% decline in 6 years. On August 20, 2006, Tower filed Chapter 11 again. This time, there would be no reorganization. On October 6, 2006, the Great American Group won the liquidation auction with a bid of $134.3 million, beating Trans World Entertainment by just $500,000. Going out of business sales began the next day. The last Tower Records stores in the United States closed on December 22, 2006. Approximately 3,000 employees lost their jobs right before Christmas. Russ Solomon emailed his staff a final message. The fat lady has sung. She was off key. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Musicland and Sam Goody had already filed Chapter 11 in January 2006, closing 226 Sam Goody stores, 115 Suncoast stores, and all Media Play locations. Warehouse Music had gone bankrupt in January 2003, blaming illegal downloading music and CD burning. Trans World Entertainment purchased 148 surviving warehouse stores, then purchased the remaining Sam Goody locations, gradually rebranding everything as FYE. Virgin Megastores announced the closure of all remaining U.S. locations in March 2009. The last stores shuttered by June. A frozen yogurt shop replaced the Times Square flagship. The aggregate numbers tell the story starkly. Of the approximately 9,500 chain music stores operating in America in 1991, roughly 7,500 had closed by 2006, a loss of nearly 80%. Between 2003 and 2008, over 3,000 record stores of all kinds closed. By the end of the decade, an estimated 1,400 independently owned record stores remained. The chains that had seemed permanent, names on every mall directory, storefronts on every boulevard, vanished within a few years of each other. Tower Records' collapse deserves close examination because it illustrates how multiple forces conspired to destroy music retail simultaneously. First, debt from overexpansion. In 1998, Tower borrowed $110 million in bonds for aggressive international expansion. Solomon later admitted they weren't really successful in any of the other countries we went into, besides Japan. The debt burden meant Tower had no margin for error, and errors were coming from every direction. Second, big box competition. Best Buy and Walmart began selling CDs as loss leaders in the mid-1990s. Best Buy priced new releases at $9.99, lower than what independent stores paid wholesale from distributors. Walmart's target was even more aggressive, $9.72 per CD, deliberately below on the approximately $12 wholesale cost. The strategy worked for them because they made money on televisions and refrigerators. The CD was just bait. But for stores that only sold music, the price competition was devastating. Walmart alone sold an estimated one out of every 5 major label albums. Combined, Walmart, Best Buy, and Target captured approximately half of all major label music sales. When a customer could buy the same CD at Best Buy for $9.99 that Tower priced at $15.99, the browsing experience had to justify a $6 premium. Third, digital piracy, and then digital retail. Napster launched in 1999. The iPod arrived in 2001. iTunes opened in 2003. CD sales dropped approximately 20% annually between 2003 and 2006. The pace of decline was faster than any business plan could accommodate. Fourth, the price-fixing settlement. Between 1995 and 2000, the five major labels had used illegal minimum advertised price policies to prevent price competition. When the FTC forced them to stop in 2000, and when settlements were announced in 2002, the industry lost the artificial price floor that had propped up margins. Tower was part of a 41-state settlement worth $143 million. The irony was brutal. The labels had artificially inflated prices during the exact years when they should have been competing with free. Fifth, cultural inertia. The freewheeling management style that built Tower was letting clerks control the stereo, letting stores stock what they wanted, promoting from within based on passion rather than credentials, could not adapt to a crisis that required cost-cutting and strategic pivoting. Solomon himself was filmed in 1994 dismissing digital threats. By the time the threat was undeniable, it was too late. 5 problems at once, and any one of them might have been survivable. All 5 together were fatal. Elton John spoke for many in the 2015 documentary All Things Must Pass. "It was one of the greatest tragedies of my life, to be honest with you, when it closed down," he said of Tower Records. "It really upset me. I miss it." He described the Tuesday morning ritual, arriving at Tower on Sunset Boulevard at 9 a.m., greeted by staff who weren't just employees who happened to work at a music store. They were devotees of music. Tower's closure displaced approximately 3,000 workers. Virgin's U.S. shutdown eliminated about 1,060 jobs. Warehouse had 4,750 employees at its bankruptcy filing. Musicland's peak workforce had been about 15,600 Kainsua, 5,800 full-time, 9,600 part-time. Many of these workers were young, passionate music fans who had accepted low wages. Starting pay was often minimum wage in exchange for employee discounts and the privilege of being surrounded by music all day. Some had built careers over decades, store managers, regional supervisors, buyers with deep expertise in particular genres. Where did they go? Some former Tower managers opened independent record stores. Most transitioned to other retail, the service industry, or music-adjacent careers. One former warehouse employee recalled, "The pay wasn't good either, but it still was one of my best jobs." Robert Moog, inventor of the Moog synthesizer, offered a more ambivalent eulogy. "I'm sorry if Tower Records and Blockbuster's sales plummet. On the other hand, it wasn't that long ago that those megastore chains drove a lot of neighborhood record stores out of business." The chains had been predators before they became prey. They had expanded aggressively, using their buying power to undercut smaller competitors, contributing to the consolidation that left the industry vulnerable when the real disruption arrived. The same logic that built them, scale, efficiency, standardization, made them rigid when flexibility was needed. The independent stores that survived often did so precisely because they had never tried to compete on those terms. Spotify launched on October 7, 2008 in select European countries. It reached the United States on July 14, 2011. Apple Music followed on June 30, 2015, reaching 10 million subscribers in just 6 months, a milestone that had taken Spotify 6 years. The shift was philosophical as much as technological. For decades, music was something you owned, a physical object you could hold, display, lend, and pass down. Streaming replaced ownership with access. For $9.99 a month, you could listen to virtually every song ever recorded. You owned nothing. The revenue data tells the story of the transition. In 2015, streaming was 34.4% of U.S. music revenue, digital downloads were 34%, and physical sales were 28.8%. Just 1 year later, in 2016, streaming leaped to 51%, overtaking both downloads and physical sales simultaneously. By 2020, streaming was 83% of U.S. music revenue. By 2024, it reached 84%, generating $14.9 billion of the industry's $17.7 billion total. The paradox is that the music industry has recovered. Total U.S. recorded music revenue hit $17.7 billion in 2024 dollars, exceeding the nominal 1999 peak of $14.6 billion, though still below it in inflation-adjusted terms. Paid streaming subscriptions crossed 100 million in the U.S. for the first time in 2024. The industry is healthier than it has been in 2 decades, but the money flows through entirely different channels. Physical media, all formats combined, accounted for just 10% of total U.S. revenue in 2024. Digital downloads fell to 3% and continue declining. The record store, which had once been the primary interface between music and the consumer, became a niche within a niche. The economics that had sustained it were gone. The streaming services delivered infinite music for a flat monthly fee. There was no physical product to stock, no inventory to manage, no clerk to recommend, no trip to make. The efficiency was undeniable. So was the loss. While the chains collapsed, a scrappy network of independent stores survived, sometimes barely, through community loyalty, used record economics, genre expertise, and sheer stubbornness. Amoeba Music stands as the largest independent record store in the world. It was founded on November 17, 1990 by Mark Weinstein, Dave Prince, and Mike Boyder, all former employees of Rasputin Records in Berkeley. They started with about 6,000 used CDs and 10 to 15,000 used records on Telegraph Avenue. The key to Amoeba's model was the buy-sell trade system. Customers brought in their old records and CDs, received store credit or cash, and Amoeba resold the inventory. This created constant turnover, repeat customer engagement, and a treasure hunt atmosphere where you never knew what might be in the bins this week that wasn't there last week. Amoeba expanded to San Francisco in 1997, into a converted bowling alley on Haight Street, and to Hollywood in 2001 on Sunset Boulevard. Paul McCartney played there for over 1,000 fans in 2007. The store relocated to 6,200 Hollywood Boulevard in April 2021 and currently stocks over 100,000 titles per location. Other music occupied a special place in New York's East Village from 1995 to 2016, located at 15 East 4th Street, directly across the street from Tower Records. The store's name was a deliberate rejoinder to the megastore across the way. Other music helped launch the careers of Animal Collective, Vampire Weekend, The National, Interpol, TV on the Radio, LCD Sound System, and Regina Spektor. Staff wrote handwritten recommendation cards. Dave Portner of Animal Collective was a former employee. The store outlived Tower by a decade, but closed in June 2016. Defeated by rising rents and streaming. The small store that had dared to call itself Other outlasted the corporate colossus. Bleecker Bob's Golden Oldies kept punk rock hours in Greenwich Village, open until 1 a.m. on weeknights, 3 a.m. on weekends, from 1967 until April 13, 2013. Robert Bleecker Bob Plotnick had sold the first Patti Smith single in 1974. Frank Zappa, David Bowie, and Madonna all shopped there. When it closed, rent had climbed to $16,000 per month. A frozen yogurt shop took its place. Rasputin Records, founded in 1971 in Berkeley, survived by owning its real estate, maintaining aggressively low prices, and snapping up former Tower Records locations after the 2006 liquidation. Electric Fetus in Minneapolis, operating continuously since 1968, was Prince's favorite record store, and the last one he visited, just 5 days before his death on April 21, 2016. What made independence different? Lower overhead for one-offs, smaller spaces, owner-operated, some owners controlling their real estate. Genre specialization created irreplaceable expertise. Gramophone Records in Chicago became the church where house music was baptized. Louisiana Music Factory in New Orleans specialized in Cajun, Zydeco, and blues. But most critically, independent stores offered human curation that algorithms could not replicate. The staff at Other Music possessed collective encyclopedic knowledge If one person didn't know a genre, someone else lived and breathed it. That expertise created genuine value. By 2024, independent stores accounted for 40% of all vinyl album sales and 29% of all physical sales in the US. A remarkable market share for a fragmented collection of small businesses competing against streaming services that offer infinite music for $10 a month. The vinyl revival is one of the most improbable comeback stories in consumer products. At its nadir in 2006, fewer than 1 million LP records were sold in the entire United States. The format was clinically dead, a curiosity for audiophiles and DJs, nothing more. Then the numbers began climbing: 2.8 million units in 2010, 13 million in 2016, 18.8 million in 2019. In the first half of 2020, vinyl revenue outsold CDs for the first time since the 1980s. In 2022, vinyl albums outsold CDs in units for the first time since 1987. 41 million versus 33 million. By 2024, vinyl sales reached 44 million units and $1.4 billion in revenue, the highest since 1984, marking the 18th consecutive year of growth. Record Store Day played a crucial role. The event was conceived in 2007 at a gathering of independent record store owners in Baltimore. Chris Brown of Bull Moose Music in Portland, Maine, sent the original email with the subject line, "Idea," pitching a national event similar to Free Comic Book Day. The organizing committee planned the first event for April 19, 2008. The timing was extraordinary. Record Store Day launched at the precise bottom of vinyl's decades-long decline. Approximately 300 independent stores participated that inaugural year, with about 10 exclusive releases from artists, including Death Cab for Cutie, R.E.M., and Vampire Weekend. Metallica spent hours at Rasputin Music in Mountain View, California, signing records. The event grew explosively. By 2009, it featured 85 special releases, approximately 500 artist appearances, and over 1,000 participating stores from Japan to Germany. Ambassadors have included Jack White, Dave Grohl, Metallica, Ozzy Osbourne, Iggy Pop, Taylor Swift, and Pearl Jam. Whether Record Store Day caused the vinyl revival or merely coincided with it remains debated, but the event unquestionably provided a rallying point and cultural visibility for independent stores at their most vulnerable moment. The demographics of the vinyl revival contain a central paradox. Gen Z, the first generation born entirely in the digital age, is driving the growth. A 2025 Vinyl Alliance report found that 76% of Gen Z vinyl fans buy records at least once a month, 80% own a record player, and 84% prefer shopping in-store. Over 252 million TikTok posts relate to vinyl records, as young consumers share vinyl haul videos and turntable aesthetics. Luminate's 2024 data on independent store vinyl buyers shows that 24% are 24 or younger, and 41% are under 35. The largest single age segment is 35 to 44 at 20%. Perhaps the most startling statistic, according to Luminate, only 50% of vinyl buyers actually own a record player. For many young consumers, vinyl has become a collectible, a display item, an identity marker, a way to demonstrate allegiance to an artist in a way that a Spotify stream cannot. A Taylor Swift LP on the shelf means something different than the same album in a streaming queue. This suggests the vinyl revival is driven less by audio preference than by a hunger for physical connection to music in an increasingly immaterial world. The album cover art, those 12 by 12 inch canvases that once lined record store walls, functions again as decoration, identity, and art object. The act of purchasing a record at a store, carrying it home, and placing it on a turntable recreates a ritual of intentionality. Streaming's infinite, effortless access is convenient, but convenience isn't the only thing people want. Approximately 1,400 to 2,000 independently owned record stores operate in the United States today. Many are new. The average age of a U.S. record store is just 6 years and 10 months, meaning most opened during the revival. California has the most at 490, followed by New York at 246, and Texas at 224. The modern record store is a hybrid creature. It sells new and used vinyl, CDs in declining volumes, turntables, merchandise, books, and sometimes coffee. It hosts in-store performances, DJ nights, and signing events. Staff curation remains the key differentiator. The experience of a knowledgeable person hearing your taste and steering you towards something unexpected. It's exactly what algorithms promise, but rarely deliver. The numbers suggest a permanent transformation, not a reversal. Streaming generates $14.9 billion. Vinyl generates $1.4 billion. There are perhaps 2,000 record stores where there were once 9,500 chain locations alone. The record store will never again be the primary way Americans encounter music, but the vinyl revival, the persistence of independent stores, the growth of Record Store Day, and the unexpected enthusiasm of gin, all suggest that the record store addresses a human need that technology has not replaced: the need for physical ritual, community gathering, and the particular thrill of holding a piece of music in your hands. The story of American record stores is ultimately a story about two different ways of encountering music. A streaming algorithm delivers music to you. It analyzes your listening history, identifies patterns, suggests tracks you'll probably like based on what you've liked before. It's efficient, it's personalized. It's available anywhere, anytime, for a flat monthly fee. A record store required something different. You had to go somewhere. You had to move through physical space. You encountered things you weren't looking for. You interacted with other human beings. The clerk who noticed what you were buying and steered you towards something you'd never heard of. The other customers flipping through the same bins. The inefficiency was the point. John Peel, the legendary BBC DJ, put it simply: somebody was trying to tell me that CDs are better than vinyl because they don't have any surface noise. I said, listen, mate, life has surface noise. Russ Solomon died on March 4th, 2018. Tower Records. Japan still operates over 70 stores. The Tower Records name returned as an online retailer in November 2020. In Dublin, 2 Tower Records stores still operate on Dawson Street and O'Connell Street, unrelated to the original company but carrying the name. The record store is not dead. It's something stranger and perhaps more interesting. A space that lost its economic necessity but retained its cultural meaning. From fewer than 1 million vinyl records sold in 2006 to 44 million in 2024, the numbers confirm what the regulars always knew. There is something irreplaceable about the bins, the counter, the music playing overhead, and the clerk who might just change your life. Was there a record store in your town when you were growing up? Do you remember what it was called? Maybe you still have something you bought there? A record you've kept all these years? The first album you ever owned? Something a clerk recommended that you still listen to? If you have a memory like that, I'd love to hear it. The comments are open.